Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 25 of Divergent Dialogues. Today, we're really lucky to have Dr. Chris Wells and Emma Nicholson from Positive Disintegration Podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I thought we'll just launch right in because Teena and I don't tend to mess around, do we? We just get straight into it.
It's too autistic for that.
I think it'd be really great if you could give us a little bit of an overview, like, of your podcast and what Theory of Positive Disintegration is. I think for our listeners, if you're not familiar with Theory of Positive Disintegration, Chris and Emma have an excellent video that we'll link in the show notes that gives a great overview. But just for context, it's really hard ask to kind of condense it so much. But yeah.
When people ask me now what the theory is about, I just tell them that it's an alternative to the pathology paradigm, that it's a theory that was developed decades ago, a long time ago, by a man from Poland, Kazimierz Dąbrowski, who created a theory that allows us to understand a variety of intense experiences, which, we would say different types of neurodivergence at this point, through a more positive lens that doesn't pathologize these experiences and instead shows the positive developmental implications. And he showed that if you do have these intense experiences of reality, you're more likely to go through positive disintegration, which I think I'd like to toss to Emma to actually maybe explain what that is.
So let's look at the two terms in that. So disintegration talks about the loosening and falling apart of your mental structures. So when you sort of go through times of inner turmoil, your sense of self can almost fall apart. And it sort of centers around human values. So what we believe, what we prioritize, how we want to be in the world. But when all that sorts of come loose and you don't really know which way is up or who you are, that is really the process of disintegrating. But the positive part comes in when you're moving towards growth and towards your authenticity. So positive doesn't refer to the emotions that you feel, because it's normally very uncomfortable and very messy. But when everything starts to loosen up, you get this chance to rebuild towards your authenticity. And that's really, I think, what the framework is about, is having everything come apart and then be able to go through this sorting process of saying, well, what is actually more like me? What is less like me? And trying to focus on rebuilding using the parts that are like your authentic self and trying to remove the parts that aren't.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that succinct summary. I think you've probably refined it over the last 3 years. So I think very recently it was actually your 3-year anniversary for the podcast.
That's right. It's hard to believe.
Time flies, doesn't it?
It really does. I think the most amazing thing is that we hardly knew each other when we started the podcast. I mean, we had only known each other for a couple months and decided to go into this venture. And now Emma's like one of my best friends. And we're like, I mean, I just can't even imagine not having you in my life. And so aside from the podcast, like, what would I do without Emma?
Same. It's crazy that it just sort of started so rapidly, but it's been great to be able to build a relationship as well as a podcast together. So it's been great.
I just realized in true ADHD style that I didn't actually read your bios. So I might do that now if that's okay.
Okay.
So people know who you are. Oh gosh. It's been one of those mornings. That's all good. Yes. So for more context, obviously Chris and Emma are co-hosts of the Positive Disintegration Podcast. So Chris Wells is a dedicated advocate for neurodivergent individuals, drawing on personal experience and a deep understanding of Dąbrowski's theory of positive disintegration. As a writer, guide, and committed Dąbrowski scholar, Chris explores how this transformative theory can contribute to personal growth and a deeper understanding of giftedness and neurodivergence. They serve as a founding president of the Dąbrowski Center and co-host the Positive Disintegration Podcast, where they aim to make this complex theory more accessible and relevant to everyday life. Chris writes for the Positive Disintegration newsletter on Substack, sharing insights that blend professional expertise with lived experience. Emma is a senior business analyst by day and content creator by night. She is the vice president of the Dąbrowski Center, co-host of the Positive Disintegration Podcast, and creates content on overexcitabilities in the Theory of Positive Disintegration for her website, Tragic Gift, and YouTube channel, Adults with Overexcitabilities. Exploring problems and finding solutions is her daily bread and butter, and she has a knack for simplifying technical information so it can be easily shared with others. She is also a creative soul with zero cares about sharing skeletons in the closet if it will help someone else. Most importantly, she has an unkillable passion for promoting the theory of positive disintegration to help people feel supported and understood. Oh, I feel like both of those bios are like a warm hug.
Yeah.
Aw.
I like the idea of being unapologetic about sharing skeletons in the closet for the purpose of helping others. I think that was one of the things that really drew me to mental health social work, because, you know, we're trained to use self to support, you know, the people we're working with. I really like that. Yeah. It's quite a powerful thing that happens when you share that little bit of something with someone, and it's just, yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I think, we probably share a few skeletons on our podcast.
Yeah.
Probably more embarrassing skeletons.
Accidental impulsivity. Here you go. Enjoy this thing about me.
Well, I noticed that Emma said zero cares, and I know that on our podcast it would have been 0 Fs.
Yeah.
I did notice that. I was like,
I'm trying to be polite.
She censored herself.
I did.
It's really funny because Teena and I actually swear a lot, but on our podcast we don't. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need to reflect on that one.
Fuck's my favorite word. I really find that it quite well enhances a lot of statements. So
Fuck's my favorite word too. And it's so versatile. You can put it in so many circumstances. But like part of the sharing thing, I think, for us is mirroring, like to alleviate people from that sense of being alone in these experiences. So the more we can share, the more other people see that they're not alone in the world, and they can find that resonance, hopefully, with our skeletons.
Yeah, and I find as well that, like, sharing some of those skeletons and those imperfections and the things that are still really hard, even though I would say I'm living really well, is managing people's expectations around what a good life or being mentally well, healthy well-being is actually about. It's, for me, living well and having a healthy sense of well-being is recognizing that sometimes with my own autism and ADHD that I just can't. So, I've got 3 kids, I'm a single mum, and tonight we're having our spaghetti bolognese in one pot on the kitchen floor, and we're just going to eat together like that because I can't manage cleaning up the kitchen today, or, outcomes achieved. Children are fed. Boom. Go to bed.
Bed is best.
Yeah, it's 6 o'clock, but that's all right.
That's all good. So I might loop back to theory of positive disintegration. So I guess our podcast, we tend to focus on talking about the autistic ADHD experience, and we've kind of touched on giftedness as well. And I guess that's because that's mine and Teena's like lived experience. So we very much talk from that. And, we've had other people come on with other kind of experiences as well. And I think the reason why I love theory of positive disintegration is because I really do think that it fits in well with a neurodivergent affirming approach to supporting people, because of that aspect of, it's not it's depathologizing a lot of these experiences that people have had, particularly around like mental health experiences, which is something that tends to co-occur with a lot of autistic ADHDers as well, a lot of struggles. And I think that, that positive disintegration process, I think particularly for people who are late identified or diagnosed and trying to kind of unmask and go through all these grief and all these changes and things like that, I think there's probably a lot of people that are positively disintegrating and not really knowing that that's what's going on for them.
I'm sure that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me because, like, I've been thinking a lot this week about where the theory came from. I've been working on this course that I'm doing, and so I've been thinking about the fact that Dąbrowski was a child psychiatrist first. He worked with children who were institutionalized in Poland, and so when you read his early work in the 1930s, like, or when I did, I mean, because this work has been inaccessible because it was in Polish, at least what I'm talking about right now. And so as it was translated and I was reading it for the first time, it just blew my mind to see that he was talking about ADHD, he was talking about autism. I mean, he's talking about dyslexia, he's talking about PDA. He's talking about, so many different experiences that kids have and that it could lead to these disintegrative experiences. But then he also worked as a clinician with adults. He worked with musicians and artists and creative people. You can tell in his work how much he appreciated gifted people as a clinician and theorist. And he saw that this particular difference was, it's like, it's not enough to be gifted to make your way out of a positive disintegration, but that these people, could be launched into it if they had these other intense, if they had the overexcitabilities. So, I mean, not everybody who ends up with a gifted label has overexcitability, but if you do, you're going to have a more challenging experience of reality than somebody who doesn't. I mean, that should be obvious to people, but it's not. Because maybe if you don't have these experiences, you don't know. And I think that it's like the double empathy problem where people don't know what they're not experiencing, and it's hard for them to put themselves in the other person's shoes. And so, like, for those of us who have these multiple exceptionalities, it's a very lonely experience. And the thing about Dąbrowski that is so amazing to me is that he had this experience. In the episode we recorded with Caitlin, Emma brought up this book he wrote and how he says about himself, I'm a psychiatrist and a psychologist. And, he's grappling with these two parts of himself. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm going off on a tangent here, but
that's okay.
But yeah,
no, you're not.
I was just thinking, Emma, would you like to give the listeners maybe a bit of an understanding of what overexcitabilities are?
Sure. I hope I can do it by this point.
We have
done enough on YouTube, right?
Dedicated to it. So yeah.
So Dąbrowski described it. It's a type of neurodivergence, and he says it's when people have a heightened response and a receptivity to stimulus, and that's both the external world and the internal world. And I like to say it's when your 5 areas of overexcitability, which is intellect, emotions, imaginational, sensual, and psychomotor, so in your body, the volume's turned up to 11. And so you have a very real, intense, and sort of multifaceted experience of the world. And the things that we would maybe consider like flaws, heightened emotions and a wild imagination, Dąbrowski has helped me rethink that, because rather than seeing them as challenges to be overcome, they are actually the things that feed the discomfort, that feed the different view of the world, that can actually help you then question things, fall apart, rebuild. So they can actually be channeled into tools for your own development. But that's really what overexcitability is all about. And Chris can probably add to this, but it's really a forerunner for the things that he saw as overexcitabilities was almost leading into the neurodivergence movement, where he saw these heightened sensitivities and intense and sensitive experiences.
Yeah, and I think jumping off both of what you've said, Chris and Emma, is that like I identify as like a multi-exceptional person. So like I have been like, you know, diagnosed autistic and ADHD and also gifted. So that experience in itself can be quite a challenging line to walk, because you have these like big challenges that you have in your life, but you also have these great strengths, and that can be a lot to unpack and to understand. And I think you know, I think that there can be a lot of challenges. You know, I think there's been a lot of discussion online and things like that around you know, giftedness not being a neurodivergence, or people that are gifted not having challenges. And, you know, as you said, Chris, there are some people who may be gifted and they don't have the, you know, overexcitabilities, or they may not have these like co-occurring challenges. But I would say probably a lot of people do. So I just, yeah, I'd like to kind of open up the discussion a little bit around that.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues is that there's a meaningful psychological difference in people who are gifted, who have a certain gifted what am I looking for? People who have asynchronous development, right? So they have a different profile than people who may have been identified gifted at school because of their testing or what they're capable of in the classroom. It's possible to be highly or profoundly gifted and not do well in school. And I think that now in the 21st century, well, we have the term twice exceptional, which means gifted and disabled. We understand that you can be autistic, ADHD, or you can be dyslexic. You can have these differences and still be gifted. These differences may mask your giftedness. It may keep you from doing well in the classroom. Many twice exceptional students are underserved and are never even identified. They don't even get a chance to figure themselves out as gifted people until they're adults, if they're lucky, because school is such a defeating experience for them. I have a child like that, and so that experience is very close to my heart. My experience was so different than my child's. I was academically talented and gifted, and so I was good at school if I wanted to be, but I didn't want to be because I'm a PDA'er. I didn't give a shit what anybody wanted me to do. I was doing what I wanted. And so I got shitty grades and went to, you know, a school that was, I mean, my guidance counselor, they treated it like a crisis and disaster that I was going to a public university that they perceived as less than. Like, oh my God, what a failure I already felt like at 18 because I chose to go to Arizona State. Because the thing that was most important to me was the quality of life at my school. I didn't care about academics when I was 18. And so giftedness is deeply misunderstood at the societal level. And it hasn't been studied properly because it's only it's only studied in the field of gifted education. And so they only care about you until you're like 18. There's no program in gifted studies or about gifted adults. And this is a huge problem for those of us with this difference, because it means that we're not represented in the literature, in psychology or social work or these fields of helping professionals. We're not, like, no one, because the study of intelligence is not the same as the study of giftedness, even though there's obviously overlap there.
Yeah. I think, well, number one, Chris, good on you for putting your needs first and picking, you know, the university that fit well for you. But, you know, unfortunately, sometimes you know, there are these expectations when you are academically talented that you're going to kind of go to the cream of the crop school or university or whatever. And, you know, it is a balance. We do need to look after ourselves and feel comfortable. But I think what I'd really love, I think all of us would probably have a lived experience of what Chris is describing, in that, you know, like, particularly in that school environment or that academic environment where we had potential to be able to, you know, I guess get good grades, but there were various things that kind of got in the way. And yeah, sometimes it is PDA and you're just like, stuff you, I don't want to do that. But yeah, Teena, I think because you kind of have a story around this, if you're happy to share that.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know which one, because the one that popped into my head when you were saying that, I thought, oh no, you shouldn't say that, Teena.
Or maybe that's the one you should share then.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, going through school, for me, it was very similar. That there was lots and lots of opportunity to do great things, but other things were more important. And yeah, sometimes it is about yeah, following a different interest, but yeah, sometimes it's also just about getting to know yourself and figuring all that out. It wasn't until I got to university that I found my passion for academics and did extremely well, and to the point where I actually thought that they were giving me these high grades just to make the university look good. And I went and spoke to the head of school and asked that question, which I was very quickly pulled into line, and like, no, that's not what we do here. I'm like, oh, okay, just wasn't sure. But yeah, I think it is really tricky. My own son, who is dyslexic, he doesn't do so well on those academic scores. He's 11, but he's really gifted at sport. And as a parent, I find myself making that mistake of kind of putting expectations on him to do things that he's really good at just because he's really good at it. He can jump in the pool at swimming carnival day and beat everyone by a lap of the pool. He doesn't train for that. He doesn't practice. But it kind of frustrated me when he turned down the offer to be a part of the swimming squad. I'm like, you're brilliant, buddy. You could do anything. And he's like, well, Mum, he's quite skinny, and he's like, it's too cold. I don't want to go in the pool at that time of the morning if they're not going to turn the heaters on. I'm like, oh mate, we live in Brisbane. So yeah, it's really interesting, I think, how that social conditioning, even when you know better, can kind of really take over and have you making those judgments and putting those expectations on others.
Emma, I'm guessing you probably have a similar story as well.
Yes. And I guess this is why it grates on me when we get these people creating content that sort of want to dismiss gifted experiences and say that it's not different and there's no difference in educational needs, or, as Chris alluded to, want to forget about what happens when it translates into adulthood, and that recognizing you're going to continue to have challenges in the rest of your life, let alone academic spheres. But I remember when I was little in primary school, I got in trouble so much because I was bored. I got held back after class because I hadn't done my work because it was boring. I was always in trouble for talking to the kids around me because I was bored, and I fidgeted and I couldn't sit still. And so it wasn't so easy to get along in that strict sort of social environment for school, let alone with the differences in my brain. Like I can't math, right? So there was an expectation. It's like, well, you're doing well in all these other subjects. What's wrong with maths? Why don't you just try harder? I was like, my brain just can't brain there. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. But when we don't understand these things, it makes life very difficult. And then try to translate that to the workplace, where you've got, sensitivities and stuff, and the office environment drives you mad because the lights are too bright and the air conditioning is too cold, and you have to wear business attire and everything. You're continually pulling at your clothes, and the smells from the tea room are continually hitting you in the face. So it is a very qualitative difference. And I think that's really got to be recognized, and tying it again to academic success when maybe you don't have strengths in all those areas, or maybe you don't have any interest. Yeah. Just because I'm good at one thing doesn't mean I should be stuck doing that for the rest of my life if I don't have any passion for it.
Yeah. exactly. And I think, particularly for like twice or multi-exceptional folks, we do tend to have that like spiky cognitive profile, and we're often very driven by our interests. So we can be amazing at something, but if we're bored, we're not going to engage with that. And I just, I really resonated with what you said, Emma. And like, I just remember when I was in primary school and we'd have to like sit cross-legged on the floor and be still and be quiet, and it was painful, like mentally, physically sitting there literally holding my body together so that I could be socially accepted in that space. And it's just, it's these sorts of things that people just don't even think of, and particularly neurotypical folks, because they don't have to do that kind of thing. But I think something that's really important to consider, like even if we just put aside overexcitabilities, we put aside twice or multi-exceptionality, if we're just purely a gifted person, I mean, I guess sometimes part of how I understand my experiences is I kind of pull things apart. Like I'll look at the autism, I'll look at the ADHD, I'll look at the giftedness, I'll look at these different aspects, and then I kind of put it back together again. And when I found out that I was autistic, I thought that was the big reason why I found it difficult to connect with others socially. But when I found out that I was exceptionally gifted, that's when it all clicked for me. And I went, okay, this is why I find it so difficult to kind of get on other people's wavelengths. And it's not it's not me going, oh my gosh, I'm so smart and, I just can't relate to these, people. It's not like that at all. It's literally like my whole life I was trying to crack this code and I just didn't know how to. And I would be rejected by other people because I was just so different. And it wasn't like, and a lot of times people weren't intentionally being mean or nasty or anything like that. It was just kind of like they were them, I was me, and we're trying to like vibe, and then it just wasn't happening. So, I think that there can be a lot of unfortunate isolation that a lot of gifted folks experience, particularly if they're not identified until later on, like I was. So it wasn't until I was 31 that I was identified.
Yeah, I have to say that, like, first, what you both described, Emma and Caitlin, about like that experience of like that pent up energy in the classroom because you're being forced to sit there. Even though I mentioned like Dąbrowski's work with, children who are hospitalized, he also like describes exactly what you just described in his first work on overexcitability and the psychomotor overexcitability. And so it's interesting because I mean, I too, and I still feel that. I mean, oh my gosh, like, I mean, when I was in child welfare and we would have to sit through, all hands meetings and stuff, meetings that just felt like they were killing me, like, and but I just seemed like, I don't know, other people didn't get it. But like what you said too, Caitlin, about how like you were trying to crack the code, like that resonates so much for me because it wasn't until I discovered the gifted community that I finally found people who got me and who I could vibe with finally. And I've made so many real, like authentic, deep friendships in the gifted community thanks to meeting people here and also through the theory. But like, I mean, people who vibe with the theory tend to be gifted because it's so deep and complex, unless they're taking like a superficial take of it, which is different. Like people who really care about the theory, want to grapple with it, learn about it, tend to be gifted people. And it's like, of course, because it's so complex and there's so much to it. There are all these layers. And that's what giftedness is. It's appreciating nuance. It's, I mean, not just appreciating it, but it's like inescapable to you. And you can't help but grapple with it. Like it's complexity. And like Lindsay Macareth coined neurocomplexity. And I really like that. It's that fits. It really is about, like it is a qualitative difference. Like Emma said, I love that. That's so true. But I just want to say, and Tina, I resonated with what you said because, like, me too, when it came to like, I didn't do well in school really until I was in undergrad, and then also in grad school too, where I just like, because it was, I don't know, it was like, again, cracking the code somehow. Like, I took a big break in school and went through this period of like mental illness where I was hospitalized a lot, like 10 times over a period of several years. And I was on disability. I mean, really perceived myself as a chronic mental patient and expected to be one for a long time. But like, you know, that's, I don't know. I mean, I guess like on the other side of that experience, I went back to school finally, and it was like I could just do it. I don't know, it was like my experience of suffering or whatever just like helped me appreciate being there and learning and just getting the opportunity to do it. And it was like I just was tuned into it finally, and it all just fell into place.
Yeah.
It is such a good feeling when you do sort of find that space that feels like it just fits. And I think in sharing things with people, I'll often talk about, it's in the within our sort of society, like those cultural expectations and things like that, you're not allowed to talk about how smart you are in a particular area or how well you do, because that's rude or gloating or whatever they say about it. But at the same time, I think that like we were saying before, when you have strengths and giftedness in one area, there can be this expectation that you're going to have that same level of ability across everything, and I feel really comfortable now, in my 40s. I think age sort of has a bit to do with getting comfortable with that sort of thing, being able to say that in this little space of the world, that is social work, mental health, autism, ADHD specifically, I am really brilliant. This is the space in the world where I shine, and I'm really, really smart and good at the things that sit in there. But outside of that, no, not so much. I not so great at managing a house. It's just, that sometimes isn't well done. And lots of other things that I'm not so great at. And I will say to people that you can't be brilliant at everything. So you can either put your energy into the thing that lights you up and makes you happy, so then you can interact with all those other parts of your world, or you can attempt to put that energy into all the little baskets so you can be somewhat great at everything or adequate, whatever it might be. But then, I don't know, it kind of dims your light a bit when you're putting so much energy into things that aren't your passion or the thing that you feel great doing. Yeah.
I think part of managing that, it is a little bit of honesty and a bit of bravery in sort of having critical conversations with the people around you. So the whole sitting in a meeting and not being able to sit still, I had that this week. But I've been honest with the people around me in my workplace that, I can't sit still in meetings. That's not one of my strengths. Like, I move all the time. I'm sorry if I sit next to you in the office because you're going to put up with me continually fidgeting. That's not going to happen. So being a little bit open about, like, sorry, if you're expecting me to add those numbers up on a whiteboard mentally, I can't do it without a calculator. That's not going to happen. But I'm really good at these other things. Right? So it's about being able to be open about those conversations. And even I've had conversations with my manager about, like, yes, I'm good at these things that I'm currently doing. I don't have any passion for it, though. I'm really not interested in part of my career development in pursuing that long term, because it will bore me, it will frustrate me, and I won't do as good a job as these things over here, which really fuel my fire, and you will get excellent results out of me because I have that desire there. So part of this whole thing is recognizing that the giftedness, the multi-exceptionality, the neurodivergence, it never stops. It's going to be with you forever. But we have to slowly let people into our worlds to see that there is a difference, and open up to them and hope that they can meet us halfway. And then also changing your own behavior a little bit. So one big thing I had to grapple with was I would come up with a lightning idea, design a solution for something really quick and go, and my brain has made all the connections already, and you throw it up in a PowerPoint presentation or a whiteboard in front of people and go, I've solved the world, right? Here's the answer to all our problems. And people are like, how did you arrive at that? And then not being frustrated with them and going, oh, come on, you can't see it, but learning to take them on the journey and explain my working and ask them questions to help them go along the same thought process, even though it's a longer journey, and being patient. So the more we are open with the people around us, I think we start to negate that double empathy problem just a little bit. Let them into our world a little bit, try and meet them halfway in their world a little bit, and that's hopefully how we can connect.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it was really great points you brought up around the double empathy problem. And I guess just looping back to what I was saying before is that, obviously, like, double empathy problem is around people struggling to connect with people that I guess have a different neurotype. And when your neurotype is significantly different to, I guess, the bell curve norm, it can take a lot of effort on both parties to be able to kind of bridge that gap. And I think, it is important, regardless of neurotype, that, it is a mutual reciprocal process. And I think, in the past, particularly with autistic ADHDers and I'd say with gifted folks as well, there's been this onus that, for them to kind of bridge this gap. But you're right, Emma, like, I think it's about, if we get to a space where people can be open about their experience, but also people of different neurotypes are curious and open to listening and understanding that people have, different experiences. So I'd really love to, I guess, kind of segue into, I think it kind of connects to what we've been talking about a little bit already, is around, how can we affirm someone's neurodivergence or like overexcitabilities when aspects of their neurodivergence or overexcitabilities may be getting in the way of their like developmental potential or growth? Because I guess, as Emma said, is we might be in an office environment, and we might be kind of a mishmash of all these different neurotypes. And I guess this isn't in the context of developmental potential or growth, but we can't just be like, okay, we're neurodivergent, that's it. Like, everyone just has to kind of accept that, and that's the end of the story. Like, we don't live in silos, we live in relation and in community with others, and everyone's going to have their different needs. So yeah, I'm just really curious to kind of open up that discussion and see what your thoughts are.
Well, I think it really comes down to the dynamisms. And so, like, when it comes to this theory, the way that you can help people not just kind of go back to like, well, this is how I am, I was born this way. Like, I think that I used to think that when I was younger, like, well, this is how I am. And so I have to learn to just accept this and, live with it. Like, that was my attitude in my 20s. And it was a problem because, I mean, as long as I thought that I was going to have these problems and I was pathologizing myself, it was really kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy for me. And so in order to get out of that, I had to do better. There's this quote from Dąbrowski in his pen name, Chainin, where he says, to be authentic is not to be natural as you are, but as you ought to be, and so, like, the dynamisms are these, forces of growth or shapers of personality that he identified that come from our experience of overexcitability, and they're relational, like you said. I mean, really, for me, the dynamisms come out in relationships. So in order for that to happen, it has to be a safe relationship with someone. There has to be mutual empathy there. It has to be a growthful, real relationship for the dynamisms, I think, although they, not that they don't come out elsewhere, but like, I think it's important for us to have relationships with people where we can be ourselves, where we can make mistakes with them, where we can grow through those mistakes that we make with them and have experiences that he labeled like dissatisfaction with ourselves, you know, inferiority toward ourselves instead of an inferiority toward other people, where we see where we should be or want to be in comparison to where we are right now, and it spurs us to growth. You know, the dynamisms, some of them can be considered spurs to self-correction. um, but then also there's this idea of positive maladjustment, and you know, to be like adjusted to a sick society. I mean, I say as an American, Dabrowski saw that as mental illness. He saw mental health and people who couldn't go with the status quo and had even ethical objections to it, you know, and moral concerns. Like all of that was part of it. So, I mean, in a nutshell, what I try to do to help people with this theory as their lens is to have them think about, you know, ways to develop their own personal growth, a mindfulness practice. I think that's the most critical thing I ever did in my life, was take seriously that I needed to be more grounded in reality and like tethered to my experience, because I lived so much in my head. I mean, I lived in like a fantasy world for years of my life. And I just for a long time was like, well, I'm ADHD, like that's how my mental processes are. Well, no, I'm able to take control of my mental processes. And now, I mean, I don't need to take medication. Like I mean, I consider that I've like engaged my own will and my own like inner resources to learn how to be more effective in the world and in my life. And I believe that any of us can do this, but some of us have more of a propensity for it because of our own drive for self-awareness.
Yeah, so many thoughts. I think I'm still collecting them. Does anyone else?
The mindfulness stuff that resonates with me on such a deep level. Sometimes I feel as though I don't know, like I'm this stealthily mindfulness disseminator, you know. My journey in my professional life and my personal life, where they sort of collided, I'd spent years and years and years with a diagnosis of anxiety, and, you know, tried medication, tried all the therapies, and nothing kind of, you know, was bringing it together for me. And professionally, as a mental health social worker, I was really, really interested in personality, you know, disorders, using DSM language there, particularly borderline, and the gold standard sort of therapeutic treatment being dialectical behavioral therapy. So I went off and learnt that, which is the whole therapy is underpinned by mindfulness. And in my studying that therapeutic modality, you do the therapies and you do the tasks and the homework, so to speak. And doing that was the first time I'd ever really actually felt any sort of relief from my anxiety. And it was the mindfulness stuff that was doing it for me. And then, you know, going on to be eventually diagnosed with autism and ADHD, but it's still mindfulness that I come back to when the wheels are starting to fall off for whatever reason, and being grounded in the here and now, and what I'm doing right now, what am I experiencing right now, what thoughts are in my head right now, and, you know, just letting myself, with no judgment, no sort of no shame, expectations, or any of those things, understanding who am I right now in this moment, what am I feeling, and, you know, what might have got me to here, you know, let's just be here right now. It's just, yeah, it's something that I'm super, super passionate about.
Yeah, and I think I've collected my thoughts finally. My brain's still like half in the episode that we recorded previously, so that's okay. I guess going back to what I was talking about when kind of walking that line, and like, you know, what you said, Chris, around kind of accepting, like, okay, I've been given these labels, I'm just gonna, you know, I'm like, my path forward is to kind of accept this aspect about myself. But something that I've really been doing a lot over the last 2 years, particularly in that unmasking process post you know, understanding you know, being an autistic person and ADHD and now gifted, is that sometimes, you know, as I said, I do that process where I kind of pull things apart. You know, something that I might think is, you know, autism or ADHD or giftedness, sometimes it's actually a coping mechanism. Like, you know, I'll give like PDA as an example, and I think, by this stage there'll already be an episode and a blog post about this in September. And, you know, I think, like, obviously, like, PDA, it's a very legitimate thing, and it's something that a lot of like autistic people can experience. But I've found that, you know, I feel like a lot of that is linked with trauma. It's linked with feeling that you have feelings of control over your life and what's happening around you as a coping mechanism. And, you know, it's okay to have those sorts of, you know, coping mechanisms. We all have different kinds of coping mechanisms, but I just found that I got to a point in my life where I was like on lockdown because I was so driven by this need for control that it was actually getting in the way of me living my life. And I found that through you know, my trauma healing and things like that, you know, it's still there, and every once in a while it's like, oh, hey, I'm here, particularly when I get really stressed. But I feel a lot freer with that part of myself. And I think, you know, sometimes when we go, okay, let's be neurodivergent affirming, you know, PDA is a profile of autism, so like we need to like affirm and accept and all these sorts of things. And yes, do we need to affirm and accept? Totally. But in the therapeutic context, when a client comes to me and they're like, I'm feeling quite limited by this aspect of my autism profile, well, my job is to support them through that. And, you know, sometimes that does involve self-reflection, and it does involve change, and it might involve looking at, you know, say PDA in a little bit of a different light, as opposed to this blanket acceptance perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between accepting and understanding and letting that hold you back. Or, like, I think when you do realize that your life is limited, and I mean, as you were saying that, I had like flashes to my 20s when, again, like I was in and out of the hospital. My life was so narrow. And it's interesting because Dąbrowski talked about overexcitability as being broad and narrow, with broad meaning it's developmental, and he also used global. And so it's like, you know, like firing on all cylinders overexcitability. And this is like the overexcitability that becomes dynamisms, that propels or becomes multi-level dynamisms and propels change and growth. But then there's narrow overexcitability, or confined is another word he used for it. And that meant phobias or tics, or not developmental kinds of overexcitability. And that's not transformative, and it leads to unilevel disintegration, which has very different and more limited developmental implications. So, you know, there's so many nuances and different aspects to our neurodivergence. And I was so different when I was younger. And I think part of my problem was that I had been labeled highly gifted, and, you know, just had these expectations, and it was like a prison, because I was like, so much of my suffering was my own creation, and I just couldn't see it, you know? And so it's like, I know that experience of suffering is what led me to do what I do now, you know? And like, I wonder what you're thinking, Emma, because I feel like we've been talking a lot,
Yeah.
but man.
I got an analogy. You know what I'm like with analogies, right? Let's wrap this up, this concept. When we're talking about, you know, having broad overexcitabilities, the purposefulness of dynamisms. If you think about a mountain, right? A mountain is born out of chaos, movement of continents, volcanic forces. And then it gets its true shape by being battered and carved by rain and wind and the elements and rock falls. So for me, this comes back to perspective and then the responsibility for transformation. Because if you change your perspective on things and see the wind and the rain not as bad things, but as things can be put to a purpose, that is first very important. Not seeing your anxiety or your guilt or your positive maladjustment or your overexcitabilities as a bad thing to be banished or just mitigated. This is the whole idea behind the theory, is that it's depathologizing this stuff, pointing out the usefulness that these things have in our growth, and then taking on the personal responsibility to transform your overexcitabilities and your dynamism into an opportunity for growth. So even something like my imagination, I've got a stupid big imagination, wants to run away with me all the time. Right? Now I can try to just mitigate that and see it as a problem to be overcome in my daily life, or I can adapt and utilize it and put it to creative work, put it into visualization for my own self-therapy. I can use that for my own growth. Imagine the person that I ought to be, rather than just seeing it as this problem that needs to be pushed down and squashed. So I think that's the thing, is we need to change our perspective on these facets of ourselves, see what value that they might have, and then take that personal responsibility to say, right, I'm going to use that in a purposeful way. I can either take a hammer and I can destroy stuff with it, or I can use it to build something great.
Yeah, I think there was two things that popped in my mind. A quote, who I can't remember who said it, but pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I think, yeah, like I guess in life, in life and within ourselves, there's going to be challenges that we have to go through, but the way we perceive those challenges is going to greatly impact, I guess, the result or what comes from that, or the journey. And I guess the other thing around, I guess harnessing that, like I recently started taking ADHD medication, and I found that to be quite helpful in terms of obviously focusing, and if you're running a PhD, awesome, but I do find that it does like stifle my creativity a little bit. So there's a function there for my kind of chaos ADHD brain, but also sometimes it can get in the way of the other things that I want to pursue, but they both have value and they're both helpful in different ways. And now that I have, I guess, an experience of having, I guess, both mental states, I can choose which is fit for purpose, I guess, depending on what I'm doing. So yeah, I think when we just view everything as a problem, it's going to be a problem. Whereas if we look for opportunities, we may find those.
Teena, I wanted to come back to what you said, to follow up on what you just said, Emma and Caitlin, because I feel like we're doing a good job here of playing on each other. It's so good. Like we should do more of this, where we have we record an episode of our podcast first, and then we do this later, because clearly this is like the warm up that we need. But like, so Teena, I used to be such an anxious person. When I first came to the theory, it was such a huge problem for me. And the mindfulness practices that I have implemented in my life have made, I am not anxious anymore. I do not have anxiety. I mean, I took Klonopin for years of my life, panic attacks, like a huge problem. I didn't even know it was possible to not have anxiety again, or ever. I just assumed it was a lifelong thing that I would grapple with and suffer from. And I don't have it anymore. I mean, it amazes me. I do things now and I'm like, I used to be so anxious when I did this. And now it's like just okay. And so I just want to give a shout out to Marsha Linehan, creator of DBT. And how did she start out? As a mental patient. I mean, when I read Building a Life Worth Living at the beginning of 2021, I was so inspired by it that I went back to get my license in social work, my LSW licensure, because I was like, I want to go back to my social work roots and get licensed and maybe work with people again. And so I did go through a period of working with individuals again, but I stopped because I just can't. Like, I am not built for working with individuals. I'm better with groups, and I'm better with like a macro approach now of delivering this message to a broader public. But I love working with people, and I love helping them discover these things, like to discover their inner resources. Like, as long as you're looking for answers outside of yourself, you're going to keep suffering. You
Yep.
have to look within, and you have to like give yourself a foundation for your wellness. And that's what the mindfulness does.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. I often talk to the people I work with about, what's within our own wheelhouse of power to manage and control. And, we can't, I absolutely agree with the idea of, neurodivergence and those accommodations, understanding, but we can only do that to an extent, because we can only ask people to understand these parts of us and what we, the differences we have, and they can choose to say, no, I don't want to. But we ourselves can really just get to know ourselves on a really deep level, and be able to then say, okay, well, actually, this is something that is really important to me, or I'm just full stop not going to be able to function the way I like to function if I don't have this thing. So I'm going to not stay in this space. I'm going to go somewhere else. And that might feel really crap, like that might be really disappointing, because it's the dream job you always wanted, or the relationship you thought was going to last forever, or whatever it might be, and choosing to sit in the discomfort of letting something go that you thought was your everything, or your purpose in life, that's really hard. Like I like the analogy that I sort of get is, like choosing to thrust yourself into a shitstorm of pain and misery. Why would you do that? And I think that the answer to that is because when you walk out of that shitstorm of pain and misery, you're going to walk into something that fits so much better for you. But you can only do that when you get to know yourself, like really quite well, and back yourself. Being in that shitstorm is really horrible, but for me, it's making sure my house is clean and tidy. I've got Ben and Jerry's cookie dough ice cream in the freezer, and my sister is on speed dial. Then I can weather out the shitstorm.
I'll add into that though a little bit of empathy for people that like are finding it hard to look inside themselves, because let's face it, facing yourself in the mirror and confronting all your shitty demons, and that is really difficult. It's made particularly difficult when other people around you may be telling you you're mentally ill, you're crazy, the way you think about yourself is totally fucked up, you've got to stop that, stop ruminating on these existential so you've got to battle not only the inner demons but the outer demons as well that are dissuading you from taking that look inside.
And the world, like those narratives that are around us, where it's, you might be someone who has, really high emotional needs, and the world will tell you that you're needy or clingy or dramatic, whatever it might be. But then if you're someone who has, lower emotional needs, you're cold and detached and whatever else. So it's like, okay, well, I'm not quite right here and I'm not quite right here. So where am I meant to be? But when you change that, and you can be really forgiving and understanding, and like, well, actually, I like these sensitivities within myself, and I don't really want to change those parts. I want to understand them better and do things a bit differently, but I don't want them to go away. When you can take that judgment away from the things that you are accused of being, so to speak, then it can be a little bit easier to look inside, but it is it is really, really hard to do. So hard to do, because I think that there is so many contradictions in the world we live in about what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. And I think also, like I was saying before, that we're not allowed to talk about how our strengths and our achievements, because that's, too gloaty. We also don't really have permission from cultural norms perspective to be okay with parts of who we are if somebody else is saying that it's wrong, if that makes sense.
Of course not, because we teach each other every day to other people, right? And we don't practice broad acceptance and inclusivity as a whole. So, when we don't understand someone, we other them and we shut them out. So how the fuck are we supposed to do that with ourselves when we find it hard to understand ourselves, and when we're confronting all this bad shit about ourselves? How are we supposed to be accepting there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just, yeah. And one of the things that I kind of get a bit soapboxy about is those social narratives and how they work to condition us to the social norm, status quo, those core beliefs. And when you start to really pull apart where they come from, how they're perpetuated, and the way it all operates, it's kind of a bit, mind-blowing. It's like, right, I get it. I'm fucked either way. Cool, right. So I can't win with these structures, these ideas, these methods that are in place. So there's actually no point in trying. Let me just go back to basics and, build my whole self, my whole world, my understanding, my approach from a different understanding, a different perspective, because, the other one is fucked either way.
Yeah, that was just the story of my life.
So much to digest in this conversation. And I think, you're totally right, Emma, in that even with my clients sometimes, I work with so many brilliant people who have intellectualized every single aspect of themselves in their life. And they come to me and they're like, Caitlin, I'm really reflective. I've seen other therapists before, and they've just been like, oh, I'm not sure how to help you. You figured it all out. And then I go, okay, let's take a pause and let's just touch in on your body. Let's touch in on your emotions. And they go, oh, what is that? And I'm like, okay, that's the stuff that we need to talk about, and that's the stuff that we need to work through. And I'm guilty of that. For a really long time, I was disconnected from my body and who I was, because I was on the kind of rat race of trying to be the best at this, and tick all the boxes and have the perfect life and all these kind of things. But I think after I had my autism, ADHD, giftedness identification / diagnosis, I really started to question a lot of these things. Is this me, or is this thing that I've been trying to participate in my whole life? And do I actually want to participate in this situation, or do I just want to do my own thing? And I find the more I listen to myself and the more I just do my thing, the more just magic happens. Things kind of flow. But yeah, it's a hard ask. It's a really hard ask for people, even in a therapeutic environment, for people to do that, because for some people they've literally never done it, and for others they're actively avoiding it because it's too painful and it's too challenging.
Yeah, that was me for a long time, for sure. When I said that I was living in my imagination in a dream world, I was not connected to my body or reality. I wasn't feeling my feelings. In my journal, I was writing about feeling like I was just a character, and just the language that I used during that time of my life of just not knowing who I was, feeling like I was in a movie, it wasn't real, self-harming because I, was like, oh, I guess I am real. I'm bleeding, that's how I was living. And so for sure, now I realize that I have this like it's such a beautiful gift to be connected to myself and to have the safety to be able to do that, to be able to reflect on the past. This week I had a conversation with somebody about something very painful from my past, and I realized that I'm able to talk about it like I do now, where I'm connected with the feeling of it without being overwhelmed by it, or I don't have to, like, I went through a period where that would have made me cry to talk about that, but I don't need to cry. Those tears have been shed and I've done my healing work. But I do want to acknowledge, like, yeah, trauma. I had a very traumatic young life. There was a lot of like addiction in my family, and I was addicted to drugs for a while. I've been addicted to gambling. Did everything I could to avoid reality for the first like 35 years of my life or more. So maybe 40. I don't know. I guess by 40, that's when I was finally kind of waking up to the fact that I was in a change process at that point. Like, but it took so long and it was so much work. I think sometimes when with the theory that we work with, positive disintegration, it's important for people to understand that it's not fast, it's painful, it's not easy, it's not quick. It can last for decades. It can be years of disintegration after disintegration after disintegration, and that's kind of what we honor on the podcast. And it's like your life's work if you're this kind of person.
Yes, it is. It is a lot of hard work, and it's painful. However, when you do have this lens of the framework to help you as you journey, you're journeying up this personal mountain and you're feeling like you're never going to see the peak. But you will hit a point where you can look behind you and say, wow, look how far I've come. And so while we want to honor the fact that it's a very long and arduous process, it's also very worthwhile.
Yeah. And taking breaks to look back and recognize how far you've come, and talking about it in, I think, the small things as well as the big things. That's a really powerful sort of process to go through with yourself from time to time, because you don't notice, you just don't really notice. And I think about it in similarity to, parents who mark the height of their children on the wall, because for the kid it feels like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to grow. I'm always going to be short. And it's like, no, so you can see that growth. And I think that, recognizing that, sometimes you grow a little, sometimes you grow a lot, and, taking the time to look back and, I don't know, like pat yourself on the back, so to speak, and just sit in the joy. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think it can be painful, but it's worthwhile. It's not in vain. It's not for no reason. There is, there is movement. Like if you don't go through that pain, there's stagnation. It's you can't move forward. And so I think we can all attest to it is worth it. It sucks, it's hard, but it is well worth it. And connecting, like, obviously, like, listening to the Positive Disintegration podcast, I think that would be a really good place to start if this is a new theory for you and you're resonating with a lot of what we're talking about. And I guess you like have a community of people now who have these experiences. So did you want to talk a little bit about like your Discord and things like that?
Sure, we have Positive Disintegration on Discord now, and Emma has Adults with Overexcitabilities on Facebook.
Yes.
So those are our two main places.
Come and find us.
And Substack.
And Substack as well. So where we have the Positive Disintegration podcast, and mostly Chris posts stuff. I try and post something every now and then.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do too.
Come with us on the journey, because as I like to say at work, look, there's risk in change, but there's also risk in not changing. So don't be too scared.
Yeah, definitely. And I can attest that it's a lovely community, and you don't have to go through these experiences by yourself. There's a bunch of other people that are having this similar experience. So yeah, check it out. I mean, I'll be honest, I kind of lurked on there for a few months before I really commented. So if you're just at the in a space to lurk, then maybe just do that.
Yeah.
That's right. Be a lurker. It's okay.
Be a lurker. Yeah. We love our lurkers too, just as much.
Yeah.
I'm a lurker too.
Yeah. Yeah. The fear of starting a conversation that I'll have to continue to participate in. It's just too great. It's like, yeah, just watch from the outskirts.
Just put comments on other people's conversations. That's how you start.
Yes.
One comment, you're done. Run away.
The demand of keeping up a Facebook thread comment, it's immense.
Yes.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah, because I don't want to come across as rude or dismissive because I forgot that I'd commented on it. It's just, it's intense.
So thank you so much to you, Chris and Emma, for coming on to our podcast. It's been an amazing conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was worried how it would work with 4 people, but we just seem to have it's worked really well. So thank you so much. And yes, if any listeners, if you're interested in learning more about theory of positive disintegration, check out the podcast. I'll put all of the links in the show notes.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a great conversation. And I mean, thanks for being part of our community. And Teena, feel free. Yeah, like you can join us too and lurk if you want. I mean, I feel like you're our people. So I hope I totally get it. You don't have to comment.
Well, I will. I'll come along and lurk about.
Okay.
Leave an emoji or something.
Thanks for having us on your podcast, and come lurk, leave emojis. We love it.